Welcome back to our special broadcast on everything you need to know about the coronavirus. As the epidemic begins to hit the globe, we're seeing more impact coming to the tourism sector as well. The global tourism sector has not been barred from the impact of the coronavirus. While South Africa has no travel advisory, no cancelled any travel to China, the United States is evacuating its citizens from the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Countries across the globe have implemented travel restrictions into China mainland, while conferences have been cancelled as well as precautionary measures being taken. Now, if you are planning to travel to China, what precautionary measures do you need to take? Joining us now in studio, Dr. Albie, the Frey, Medical Director of the Travel Doctor. Dr. Albie, it's good to have you with us.
Good morning, Thabo. Thank you for having me.
We are seeing some private tour operators showing some signs of understanding the situation and what we are dealing with as far as this virus is concerned. They are waiving their cancellation fees for those who are inbound coming from China into the country. How do you view this?
I think we're getting a sense of sensibility in the entire coronavirus debacle. People are beginning to realize that they have to be sensitive about it, but at the same time also be practical. And that's why some people are prepared to waiver these things. Some people are prepared to waiver the cancellation fees, etc. So if people don't want to travel, they're not being forced to do so. At the same time, I think we shouldn't overreact and be overly concerned. It depends on where you're going and perhaps in the case of inbound tourism, where you're coming from.
Yeah, they're saying this is in order to preserve the reputation of the country, particularly the tourism sector's reputation. How does this assist in terms of how the world views our tourism sector?
Well, I think we have many other problems over and above the coronavirus. Violence, attacks, etc. is a much bigger deterrent for people to coming here than a concern about coronavirus. I'm sure that you're pretty much aware that we've only had one case of coronavirus in Africa thus far. Egypt is that part of Africa. There's a desert between us. But we would obviously like to not mess people's lives around, and so it would be reasonable. But for now, there's really no danger of coronavirus in this country, and I would be careful as an individual traveler to cancel any trip to Africa because of a concern about coronavirus.
Right, this waiver of cancellation fees not extended to non-Chinese citizens, which means that those who are coming from other parts of the world, they don't get that waiver. But what do they get instead?
That's right.
Because everyone is in a little bit of a panic, especially if you're looking at Europe and you're looking at the US.
So it's very interesting, Thabo. I consulted with one of the travel insurance companies that we work with and asked the question last week. And they will cover you if you travel to a country, even if it's a country with declared coronavirus. If you have to go to China and you contract the disease, they will extend cover to you. I've seen similar email from a local medical aid. Everybody is covered as for any other disease. However, they will not cover you for what they call disinclination to travel. So unless the WHO is saying do not travel to country X, your travel insurance, if you now decide that you're not going to go, and you claim the cancellation fees, your air tickets, your hotel costs, etc., they may not cover that.
I mean, how does that affect outbound tourism, especially in South Africa? You know, we've got very close transport links with China. And are we seeing more South Africans continuing to travel, maybe not directly to China, but to other parts that are linked and connected to that route?
Well, Thabo, you know, I was in Beijing at the beginning of the year. I have this little cough.
I was about to do.
No, but that's the point. Yeah. You know, China is a massive country. And yes, the country as a whole has been affected. We know about the specific province. We know about the city where the outbreak occurred. But I think as an individual traveler, we have to look at where are we going, what are we going to do, and what are our actual exposure risks, and then do the sensible things. Avoid, that's possible in a country like China, avoid crowded areas, wear face masks. Frequent hand washing is so important in all these viral disease outbreaks we see all over the world. It was the same thing with Ebola. It's the same with influenza. Washing hands, maintaining distance between people. That's what's really important. So it does not mean that it's impossible to travel. And I think one of the big concerns the World Health Organization has in all epidemics and all outbreaks, this one's no different, is the economic disruption that we see that's already happening. Right. Because the markets just get scared. And if we look at, well, why? If we compare coronavirus and the current death toll and the rate of the reproduction number to other diseases that people are not that concerned about. So I want to put a quick one on the table. we say that we've seen about 1,500 deaths, let's say since the beginning of December. So roughly over a 2-month period because it wasn't reported immediately, etc. Yeah. So in 2 months, this virus has killed 1,500 people, by far the majority in China.
Right.
The ordinary seasonal influenza virus kills 30,000 people globally every month. So 60,000 people have died from influenza in the same period that 1,500 people have died from coronavirus. And yet we have to beg people, especially those at risk, older people, people with pre-existing disease, we have to beg them to take the influenza virus. Yeah. Now, I can assure you, if there's a coronavirus vaccine out there now, everybody will be queuing up.
Yeah. And that's 68,000 infections, though, big enough for the World Health Organization to say this is a public health emergency of global concern.
Okay. That's a very important concept to understand. They're not declaring it an emergency to say panic. They're declaring it an emergency because that puts certain legislative measures in place all over the world. It allows funds to be channeled to the control of this disease and of this outbreak. So I would like to dare our listeners and our viewers to perhaps just have a quick think, which other public health emergency of international concern still exists and has been in existence since before the Ebola outbreak in West Africa? Yeah. It's polio.
You know the numbers. It's seemingly not peaking. Yeah. Because it was expected, I think, in 3 months now that it would have peaked. And if you look at what happened to the SARS virus, it peaked after 3 months, and then we are beginning to see a decline. This one, at the 3-month point, it's not really peaking at this point.
I'm not that much of I'm not an epidemiologist, so I would be careful to wage an opinion on that. But from my understanding, is the previous SARS virus was a lot more virulent. It caused people to be acutely, visibly, clinically ill a lot more than the current one. So this one, it's easier for this one to sneak around a little bit more and infect more people than the previous one. But the severity of the disease is not the same as the first SARS virus. Right. And that's why we may see that in the end, a whole lot more people globally may be infected. There's talk about as much as 60% of the population. But it's not the same severe disease that we saw in Hong Kong.
It does require global effort, though, Doc, in the sense of how we respond to it technically, in terms of how we limit human-to-human transmission, how we treat those who are infected, and our capacity to be able to isolate them. South Africa so far doing well?
Well, we haven't had a case to prove the pudding.
Yeah.
The proof of the pudding lies in the eating. So we haven't had a case, but I know that on government front, national NICD, the Department of Health, there is communication flying around, there's meetings taking place, and I think the basic infrastructure is there to cope with any possible potential cases.
Yeah. And what do we then need to take into consideration? I mean, before we book, because I can hear from what you're saying, you're encouraging people to continue booking. Don't panic as yet.
Yeah.
You can travel to any other places. I mean, of course, the fear is that when you're in a plane, you're in a closed, confined space, you don't know who is in the plane with you and where they've been.
That's absolutely correct. But it so happens that I had the privilege of being in Canada at the time of the outbreak. Now, if you land in Vancouver and you look out the window, you see Eastern airlines all over the place. There's only one European airline. And you realize how close you are to China. Canada's got a huge Chinese population. There's a lot of to and fro travel. And you see lots of people walking around with their masks. You see people that are concerned. But there's a general sense of calm. And I think that's extremely important for all of us to keep level-headed about this outbreak.
Yeah. Overall sense of calm. The other sectors, of course, which you've also mentioned, are the construction sector, citrus growers sectors. It's just generally the free movement of people, goods, and services becoming negatively impacted. 95,000 tourists that we see in the country from China over a period of a year. Most of it amounting to millions in terms of ahead bookings. Have you seen a drop in those?
I haven't seen the numbers, so I wouldn't want to comment on that. But that would certainly have a big impact on our tourism sector, and we all know how important tourism is for us. So I think to show the world also that we're sensible and that we're playing safe about that. I think earlier in the program we were looking at the temperature monitoring at the airport. I think they've jacked that up quite a bit. In the past it's been a little bit slack. But it's very good to see that we are checking temperatures. Of course, it's not just up to the government and points like that. Somebody can walk in and have a normal temperature, but become ill a couple of hours later. So it's up to individual travellers to be responsible as well, and to report if they come down with a fever, a headache, a cold or a flu-like illness. Get hold of the nearest medical facility, phone ahead. Don't just walk into a full consulting room. Phone ahead and say that you're concerned and that you've got a fever and a cold-like illness. And it's very important to mention, do you think you've had contact with somebody that might have contracted the virus before? Or in Africa, we must never, ever forget, any flu-like illness is malaria until proven otherwise. Malaria kills 500,000 people a year globally, majority in Africa. And somebody who comes down with a fever and a headache now in Africa, unless they've been to China, they've had contact with a large Chinese community that there might have been disease in, which we don't have. The first thing to consider is malaria. It's not
500,000
corona.
people a year.
500,000 people a year.
Is it also considered a disease of emergency of international concern?
It's not a public health emergency of international concern. The other one that I mentioned just now is polio. If we lose the battle against polio, we will see 350,000 people a year infected with the virus, paralyzed or dead. And that is a public health emergency of international concern. And yet, by far the majority of the public don't think about it, don't know about it. But that's a big global battle that's extremely important for us. That's why I want us to see the perspective between these big diseases. We get used to them, and that's part of the problem. So then when something exciting like this comes up, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. I mean, even poor old Ebola isn't really getting a showing now in the DRC. And thankfully, it finally looks like it's calming down. But Ebola in the DRC wasn't half as well covered as Ebola in West Africa. And that's because that's where the West travels to. Not many people travel to that part of the continent. But we mustn't forget our other neglected diseases.
But speaking of Ebola, I mean, it is reported that the Ebola virus itself has kind of helped, especially African countries, to build a certain degree of infrastructure as far as being able to isolate people who would have contracted the Ebola virus, and they're using that infrastructure now for those who have contracted the coronavirus.
Sure. So the idea, the teaching about quarantining, about isolating people, that's certainly gone a long way because of the Ebola outbreak. Some of the other things have been neglected because we focused on Ebola. So I want to make another quick comparison. We talk about the reproductive number. So the coronavirus has got a reproductive number of about 2 to 3. That's more or less the same as the Ebola virus. It means that one infected person is likely to infect 2 other people. Okay. Another disease that killed 140,000 people in 2018 is measles. That's got a reproductive number of 18. It means that one person will infect 18 others. We've got to get our children vaccinated. Parents.
Dr. Albie, wow.
Roll up.
Very, very fascinating. Nice chatting to you. I appreciate your time.
Great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Albie Frey, Medical Director of the Travel Doctor.